Okay, we're back with our Constitution Hour with Colonel John Eidsmoe, Foundation for Moral Law. But we have a question from the audience. So what was your question, sir?
My question is, how do you feel, do you feel like many other people that our Second Amendment rights are being infringed right now by this current administration? And the Second Amendment strictly says that shall not be infringed. Do you tell us about how you feel about the Second Amendment, and how we can continue to what's the best words to say? Do you feel that we not only have an administration that is trying to take away our Second Amendment rights, but we also have the UN coming in and thinking that they can take away our Second Amendment rights? Because does not the Second Amendment uphold the rest of the amendments in the Constitution?
Very good question, and I myself am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And there's been a controversy for a number of decades here in America as to what the Second Amendment means. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the well-being of a free people, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And most throughout history have understood this to be an individual right to keep and bear arms, but there has been a view that seems very contrary to the language of the Second Amendment itself, that it only protects the right of the state to maintain a state police force or a state militia, that it does not have any individual application at all. The Supreme Court several years ago, in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller, finally came down in a 5-4 decision and ruled that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. And therefore, that regulation by the District of Columbia was struck down as unconstitutional. Then came the question, does the right apply to the states? And in the McDonald case, a couple years after that, the Supreme Court, again, by a 5-4 margin, struck down a ordinance of one of the Chicago suburbs concerning firearms. And by a 5-4 margin, the court says not only does this protect individuals, but it applies to the states as well as to the federal government. So the right is now being protected, but only by a 5-4 margin when it should be unanimous because it's so obvious. Now let me give you several reasons why I would say that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. First of all, it is in the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is speaking about individual rights. If I were to go to a constitutional law conference and present a paper in which I argue that the First Amendment guarantee of a free press just means the right to publish a state newspaper, I'd be laughed out of there. Why make that argument about the Second Amendment? Secondly, you look to the language itself, the right of the people. Now, we don't use the term people in the Bill of Rights as being synonymous with the state. And we're talking, when we speak about people, we're talking about individuals. A third thing, you notice the language that it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Not just the right to report to the armory when you're called up for militia duty and pick up your weapons there at the armory, but the right to keep and bear arms again implies that it's an individual right. And putting all these together, I'm convinced that the framers intended this to be an individual right. And one of the reasons is, as Justice Joseph Story said in the 1830s with his commentaries on the Constitution, Story is considered to be the leading expositor of the Constitution of the 1800s, and he describes the Second Amendment as the palladium of liberty. That is, the outer fortress, the outer wall of protection. You might say what he means is, this is the right that makes the other rights possible. It's the right by which we protect our other rights. And if that right were taken away, then our other rights would not be in a position where we could defend them. And I heard it said, and this is pretty kind of funny, but I heard it said one time that if I had to choose between the right of free speech and the right to keep and bear arms, I'd choose the right to keep and bear arms. and then I can say anything I want because I have a gun. But there is some truth in that. And if you read through the Federalist Papers, you'll find that James Madison makes clear when he talks about local militias that the main reason for local militias was that they would be a bulwark against federal tyranny. Alexander Hamilton says the same thing in the Federalist Papers, and Hamilton is far from being a wild-eyed revolutionary. So if people think the idea that the individual right to keep and bear arms is to say that has something to do with defense against tyranny, if you think that's radical and wild, I can only say you need to address your complaint to James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, because that's exactly what they say. It exists for other purposes too, for protection, individual protection, of course, because you go back in those days, if you're living out in the country and there's an attack by outlaws or whoever it might be, you don't call 911. And in fact, even towns did not have police forces in the sense that they have them today. The police could come out afterward and make an arrest, but as far as protecting you from an attack, they weren't in a position to do so, and in many cases they aren't today. The response time, even for 911 calls, is such that by the time they get there, the crime is probably going to be over. The idea that we need the individual right to bear arms in self-defense is as applicable today as it has ever been.
Wow. Thank you, Colonel Eidsmoe. That was a wonderful explanation. I hope everyone hears that and understands that. You need to listen to it over again to get the full gist of it if you need to, but like he says, you know, we really need it. So we need to interpret things according to the way the founders meant for it to be interpreted. And that's what I love about the Foundation for Moral Law, because they study the original intent. And that's what's missing these days, Colonel Eidsmoe.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir, for doing that for us. God bless you.
Well, thank you, and it's been a pleasure to be with you, and keep spreading the word.